Before we begin, viewer discretion is advised. What you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's a televised demolition, a masterclass in verbal combat disguised as daytime entertainment. This is not the kind of interview you sip coffee through. This is the kind you lean forward for, remove your headphones for, and replay 3 times just to make sure it really happened. Because when a beloved comedian walked onto The View that morning, she didn't arrive with jokes. She arrived with the kind of truth that doesn't just sting, it scorches the earth. What unfolded between Joy Behar and Leanne Morgan wasn't an interview. It wasn't even an argument. It was an execution, broadcast live to millions of viewers who tuned in expecting a harmless chat, and instead witnessed one of the most brutal on-air takedowns in daytime TV history. Joy Behar sat at the famous View table with that expression, the one everyone in the entertainment world knows. A half-smile, half-smirk that she'd perfected over 41 years of television dominance. It was the look of a woman who believed she owned the studio, the cameras, the conversation, and everyone who dared sit across from her. Her hair, polished to perfection, caught every studio light. Her notes were neatly stacked, ready for deployment like weapons in a battle she believed she had already won. Joy had built an empire on 3 rules: strike first, strike hard, never apologize. Today, she intended to follow them to the letter. Producers had booked Leanne Morgan, the rising star of country comedy, 12 million followers, soul, doubt theaters in every corner of America, a name becoming impossible to ignore. But Joy didn't see any of that. To her, this wasn't a powerhouse entertainer. This was a small town woman from Tennessee, plucked from country roads and tossed onto a New York set. Easy prey, warm-up material before lunch. Someone to toy with, embarrass, and dismiss for sport. What Joy didn't realize was that she wasn't staring at prey at all. She was staring at her own executioner. "All right, ladies, we are back." Joy's voice sliced through the air with theatrical flair, part ringmaster, part predator circling a cornered animal. "I'm here with Leanne Morgan, who apparently thinks telling jokes about small town life makes her the next big thing in comedy." There it was, the ambush, delivered with perfect timing, a condescending smirk, a verbal hook disguised as a question. The audience tensed, the co-hosts froze, unaffected faces masking the collective thought. Joy is going for blood today. "Leanne, honey," Joy continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "why don't you tell our viewers what makes your little story so special?" Honey, little, special. 3 words sharpened into 3 daggers. In daytime TV language, this wasn't small talk. This was a deliberate attempt to shrink the guest, to make her feel unimportant before she even opened her mouth. Leanne sat calmly in a simple but elegant outfit, something soft, something real, something that said she didn't need branding or labels to define her. Joy's dress was designer. Leanne's was authentic. The contrast was almost poetic. She smiled politely, but her eyes carried a calm, devastating precision. They said, "I see exactly what you're trying to do, and more importantly, you are wildly underestimating me." "Well, Joy?" Leanne began, her warm Tennessee drawl sweet as honey, but hiding a blade behind every syllable. "I reckon what makes my comedy special is that it comes from a real place. Real life, real struggles, real people. Not everybody needs to put on airs or talk down to folks just to get a laugh." The temperature in the studio shifted. A gentle voice had delivered the first strike, and it hit harder than yelling ever could. Joy's expression flickered, just for a second, but it was too late. Everyone saw it. The queen of the table had been grazed. "Oh, please," Joy scoffed, flipping her hand with exaggerated dismissiveness. "We all know real comedy requires intelligence and sophistication. Anyone can tell stories about their hometown and get a few chuckles from people who don't know any better." There it was again, the weapon Joy trusted most: intellectual superiority. A subtle but unmistakable assertion that she was above everyone else, including the audience itself. But the studio could feel it, the blow hadn't landed. The audience didn't shift toward Joy. They shifted toward Leanne. Leanne leaned forward, her smile still soft, her voice still calm, but her words now sharpened to surgical precision. "You know what's funny to me, Joy?" A hush fell over the room. The co-hosts went still. The audience leaned forward in perfect unison. It wasn't a question, it was a warning. Leanne continued, voice steady. "It's funny how some folks think they're sophisticated just because they live in a big city. They think talking down to people makes them smarter, when really all it does is show how out of touch they are with the real world. You say anybody can tell a story about their hometown, but honey, that's the thing. Anybody can try. Not everybody can make millions of people laugh doing it. The blade was in, and she twisted it with a smile. Joy froze, not because of what was said, but because the audience erupted not with laughter, but with recognition. They felt the truth in Leanne's words. For the first time in a long time, Joy Behar wasn't in control. And Leanne Morgan, calm, polite, southern, underestimated Leanne, had just turned the tables with nothing more than honesty, charm, and the kind of quiet strength Joy had never been prepared to face. This wasn't a clash. This wasn't a disagreement. This was a dethroning, one subtle sentence at a time. The studio had grown so quiet it felt as though the entire building were holding its breath. A silence this sharp, this sudden, did not simply arrive. It carved its way into the room like a blade. Even the audience, usually loud, reactive, and eager to respond to any spark of conflict, froze in place. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the faint shifting of someone's chair, even the soft exhale of a camera operator who had forgotten for a moment that they were supposed to be invisible. And in the center of this suspended moment stood Joy, the veteran host who had spent 41 years sharpening herself into a weapon of comedic instinct, fast, cutting, and unafraid. Yet now, for the first time anyone could remember, a single sentence had dismantled that armor. "I have been watching your show for years," Leanne had said calmly, almost sweetly, "and I keep waiting for you to say something genuinely funny instead of just mean-spirited." The impact of those words was immediate and unmistakable. It wasn't shouted, it wasn't cruel, it was simply honest, devastatingly, disarmingly honest, and that was what made it land with surgical precision. Joy's face flushed a deep crimson, the color rushing upward like a warning flare. Her eyes widened just enough to betray the crack forming beneath the surface. She was a woman who had weathered hecklers, critics, and public controversies, yet somehow this polite country comedian had managed to knock her off balance with nothing more than an observation. "Excuse me," Joy's voice rose half an octave, the first hint of panic peeking through the practiced bravado. It was the sound of old defense mechanisms kicking into gear, the familiar clank of an arsenal she had depended on her entire career. "I have been doing comedy longer than you've been alive, sweetie. Do not come on my show and lecture me about what is funny, sweetie." The word sweetie landed like a dull weapon, small, belittling, meant to shame rather than strike. But the attempt slid harmlessly off Leanne, who remained steady, unbothered, almost serene. Joy swung again out of habit, but it was a swing from someone who suddenly wasn't sure of her footing. "Oh, honey," Leanne replied, completely composed. Her tone was warm, unthreatening, the kind of tone someone might use while gently correcting a child rather than challenging an industry titan. "I'm not lecturing you. I'm just observing." A few members of the audience inhaled sharply. They could feel the power shifting, even if Joy could not. "See," Leanne continued, folding her hands on the table as though settling into a front porch conversation, "where I come from, we were taught that being mean isn't the same as being funny. But maybe that's just small-town values talking." Small-town values. The phrase seemed to land in the middle of the set with a weight that was almost physical. It didn't sound like an insult. It didn't sound like a boast. It was simply a statement, yet somehow it carried a truth that made Joy's composure falter. Her hands tightened around the edge of the table until her knuckles turned white. Decades of carefully crafted persona were slipping, inch by inch, in front of millions of viewers. "Small-town values," Joy repeated, her voice struggling to stay sharp. "You mean small-minded thinking? Real comedy challenges people, makes them think. It isn't all sunshine and rainbows like your little folksy routine." There it was again, little folksy routine, another diminishing phrase, but this time it trembled at the edges. Joy was running out of ammunition, and everyone watching knew it. Leanne, however, did not rise to the bait. She simply nodded as though Joy had proven her point for her. "You're absolutely right, Joy," she said softly. "Real comedy does challenge people." The calmness was so steady it almost seemed engineered, but Leanne wasn't attacking. She was inviting a conversation, a real one, and that was what made it dangerous. "So," she continued, tilting her head with genuine curiosity. When was the last time you told a joke that brought people together instead of tearing them apart? When was the last time you made someone feel better about themselves instead of worse? When was the last time your comedy healed instead of hurt? 3 questions, 3 shots to the foundation of Joy's entire legacy. The audience didn't gasp this time. No one dared breathe. It was as though the studio itself understood that something irreversible was unfolding. Joy opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again, but nothing came out. For the first time in 4 decades of quick recoveries, cutting remarks, and flawless verbal footwork, Joy Behar found herself speechless. And not stunned, not offended, truly, profoundly speechless. The woman who had built her career on dismantling others with a look or a sentence had been undone by a simple, earnest question from someone she had dismissed only minutes earlier. Whoopi Goldberg, sensing the crisis with the instincts of a seasoned co-host, attempted to intervene. She leaned in, voice bright, forced, desperate to redirect before Joy sank any further. "Well, this is getting interesting," she interjected. "Let's talk about your tour, Leanne." But Joy's pride, dulled, stubborn, brittle, refused rescue. She could not retreat, not after so many years of dominance. Even with her arsenal empty, she insisted on standing her ground. And that was the moment everyone watching understood. A crack had formed, a real one, not caused by scandal or controversy, but by something much rarer, truth spoken kindly, and the silence that followed said more than any punchline ever could. 2 statements, perfect parallels, a pair of verbal mirrors held up directly to Joy's face, and in those mirrors, the reflection wasn't flattering. Years of sarcasm, condescension, and cheap superiority snapped into focus. The studio felt it, the audience felt it, and Joy felt it most of all. Joy scoffed loudly, sharply, the brittle laugh of someone who had run out of real arguments. It was the sound of a collapsing defense system. "Oh, please," Joy sneered, waving her hand as if brushing away dust. "This isn't kindergarten. This is show business. If you can't handle a little criticism, maybe you should go back to whatever small town comedy night you crawled out of. The phrase dripped with venom, the words of someone reaching desperately for anything insult, jab, shred of power as her command of the room slipped through her fingers. Each syllable revealed not confidence, but panic. Not dominance, but survival instinct. Joy wanted Leanne to feel small because she was shrinking by the second. Leanne didn't flinch. She simply tilted her head, eyes narrowing in polite confusion, as if Joy had spoken in a language unknown to civilized society. "Criticism," Leanne repeated softly. "Is that what you call this?" She blinked, genuinely puzzled. "Because where I come from, we call it being ugly for no good reason." The reaction was instant. 200 people gasped at the exact same second, a synchronized, echoing inhale that shook the rafters. Even the boom mic operator jerked upward, unsure whether to stay focused on Joy or swing the microphone toward Leanne, who had suddenly become the gravitational center of the entire building. "But since you brought up criticism," Leanne continued, settling back in her seat with the ease of someone about to say something monumental, "let me offer you some." The room froze, really froze. Camera operators leaned forward out of instinct. The co-hosts exchanged quick, wide-eyed glances, a silent conversation that said, "Is she really about to do this?" Whoopi mouthed something, possibly "Oh Lord," but no sound emerged. The audience sat in collective stillness. Everyone knew something devastating was coming, and it was too late to stop it. Leanne inhaled gently, her posture relaxed, her voice tender enough to rock a baby to sleep, but her words, they were weapons crafted with surgical precision. "Your whole career," she said slowly, "has been built on punching down." Joy's face stiffened, the mask cracking down the center. "You make fun of people who can't fight back." Leanne continued, her voice carrying the softness of a lullaby and the force of a righteous verdict. "You mock folks who don't have your platform, your spotlight, your microphone. You don't challenge power, you bully the powerless, and maybe that worked back in the day. But people see through it now." A single murmur rippled through the audience, shock, agreement, disbelief, awe layered into one sound. Joy tried to interject, her mouth opening into a defensive snarl, but the words never formed, because Leanne kept talking. Calmly, firmly, unapologetically. You say this is show business, Joy, but somewhere along the way, you started confusing being loud with being right. You started confusing snark with sophistication. You forgot that comedy isn't supposed to tear people apart, it's supposed to bring folks together. Joy swallowed visibly, and for the first time in the entire segment, she looked smaller. The queen of daytime television suddenly seemed like a person who had spent decades throwing punches, but had never learned how to take one. Leanne wasn't done, and let me tell you something else, since we're being honest, she said, leaning in ever so slightly. You talk about big girls like it's a club you built, but honey, I grew up around real big girls, women who had backbone, women who lifted each other up, women who didn't need to insult strangers to feel important. The words hit Joy like waves, steady, unstoppable, undeniable. Real big girls don't hide behind sarcasm, Leanne said. They don't mock people's backgrounds. They don't look down on small towns, or working people, or mothers trying to make ends meet. Real big girls don't punch down because they're too busy holding people up. The audience broke not into applause, not yet, but into a low collective "oh" sound that filled the studio like wind before a storm. Joy's fingers tightened around her note cards, knuckles whitening. Her jaw clenched. Her eyes darted toward the hosts for rescue. Whoopee, Sarah. Anyone but no help came. Everyone knew the truth. Leanne had taken control of the room without raising her voice, without losing her composure, without sacrificing an ounce of dignity. And Joy Behar, television powerhouse, veteran host, master of snark, was sitting across from a woman who had just dismantled her decades-long persona in a handful of sentences. The cameras stayed locked. The audience leaned in. Joy blinked too slowly, too deliberately, and Leanne, she waited, calm, steady, absolute, because the blow she had just delivered wasn't the last one. It was only the beginning. As the words sank in, Joy's face shifted from flushed red to a deep, furious purple. The transformation was almost surreal, from smug predator to cornered animal in less than 10 minutes. She looked like someone who'd suddenly realized the trap she set for someone else had snapped shut on her own leg. How dare you come on my show and psycho-analyze me? Joy spat, her voice trembling with a mix of outrage and something far worse, fear. You don't know anything about my career or what I've accomplished. Leanne smiled, not mockingly, not aggressively, but with a softness that somehow made her words even more devastating. Oh, I know plenty. She paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to rattle Joy's already fraying nerves. I know you've spent years making jokes at the expense of regular people. I know you think being from New York automatically makes you smarter than everyone else. I know you've built an entire brand around being the mean girl who never grew up. Leanne tilted her head slightly, as though examining something fragile and broken. And honestly, Joy, it's just sad. That word sad landed harder than any insult could. It wasn't anger, it wasn't disgust. It was pity, and pity, delivered with such calm sincerity, was the single most lethal weapon in Leanne's entire arsenal. Joy flinched, actually flinched. Her voice wavered as cracks began splintering through her armor. I am successful, she stammered, her tone wobbling between fury and insecurity. I have a career, I have influence, I have, what do you have, a few YouTube videos and some county fair gigs, Leanne laughed. And for the first time that entire episode, the studio filled with something beautiful, genuine warmth, authentic humanity, the kind of real, heartfelt sound that had been missing from The View for years. You know what I have, Joy, she said softly. The audience leaned in. I have people who come to my shows and leave feeling better about themselves, not worse. I have fans who tell me my comedy helped them through the darkest times of their lives. I have the respect of my peers, because I treat people with dignity. Then came the final, gentle knife. Can you say the same? The silence that followed wasn't ordinary silence. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't a pause. It was absolute. A heavy, suffocating stillness that pressed against the walls of the studio and left everyone frozen in place. Joy opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She looked like a fish gasping for air, floundering desperately for a comeback, any comeback, that wouldn't make her look even more pathetic than she already did. Sunny Hostin, sensing the complete collapse of the segment, hurled herself into the verbal battlefield like someone jumping onto a grenade. Well, Sunny said nervously, her smile trembling at the edges, Different comedians have different styles, right? Everyone has their own way of connecting with audiences. Leanne didn't even turn her head. Different styles. She repeated gently, still staring directly at Joy, as if she were holding her in place with her gaze alone. Is cruelty a style now? Because that's all I've seen from Joy today. Joy stiffened. Leanne continued, voice steady as ever. She invited me on this show not to have a real conversation, but to try to embarrass me in front of millions of people. And the saddest part is, she's only embarrassed herself. No one breathed. No one moved. The studio was locked in stunned silence. Finally, after what felt like a full minute, Joy found her voice again, though it was thinner now, weaker, trembling around the edges. It was the voice of someone fighting, not a guest, but the realization that the power she always assumed she had might not be there anymore. She tried to speak, tried to reclaim control, tried to salvage something from the wreckage. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. The cameras zoomed, catching the moment with brutal clarity. Joy Behar, the woman who had spent decades tearing others down, sat speechless and shaking, completely disarmed by a comedian who never once raised her voice. And Leanne, she simply folded her hands in her lap, serene as a summer morning, as if she hadn't just dismantled the queen of daytime television with nothing but kindness sharpened into steel.